Marcus Vance stood in the middle of his own gleaming commercial kitchen, the kind of place that smelled of copper and money, and screamed the words he had rehearsed for years. "You are nothing without my name." The line came out of him like scripture, hot and practiced. A sermon he had been preaching to his wife for 6 years and was now, finally, free to shout across the open line. Elena Vance stood 3 feet from him with a pastry bag in her hands. She had been piping the finishing rosettes on 300 individual dessert plates for the biggest corporate gala of the company's life. Her fingers were steady. Her eyes were not. She had known. Somewhere in the careful corner of herself she kept hidden under aprons and timers, that this was coming. She had felt the room tilting for weeks. There had been a softness in the way Marcus touched her shoulder that had nothing to do with affection and everything to do with approaching the end of something he was about to be done with. There had been a new tablet on the counter that no one but Chloe ever touched. There had been a new scent in the guest bathroom that was not hers and not his. There had been a different voice, low and conspiratorial, on the other end of his phone calls. There had been Chloe Sims, 26, sharp as a new knife, clocking into the office each morning in a different silk top, her heels loud on the slate floor, talking about reach and engagement and overhead. The kitchen was loud with clattering pans, the rush hour hiss of high-powered burners, and the percussive thud of finished plates being stacked into insulated carriers. Behind Elena, 2 line cooks were plating the main course in fast, repetitive arcs. A dishwasher was hauling an open tub of used linen toward the back service door. Nobody looked up at Marcus's outburst. Nobody had to. They had all heard him speak in that voice before, and they had all learned, in their own time, that it was safer to keep plating. Marcus stepped closer to the prep table where Elena was working. He did not pick up a pan. He did not lift a spoon. He crossed his arms over the chest of a polo shirt that cost more than her entire wardrobe. He smelled, as he always did, of coffee he had not made and cologne he had not paid for. Chloe Sims hovered at his shoulder, holding her tablet low against her hip, whispering words Elena could not fully hear but could read off her perfect lips. Inefficient. Overhead. Slow traditional methods. Expensive. Elena turned her head just enough to let Chloe know she could see her. Chloe did not flinch. Chloe tilted her chin up a quarter inch. Elena set down the pastry bag. She wiped her knuckles on the towel, hooked at her waist. She did not raise her voice. She knew by then that raising her voice had never worked in this kitchen, on this floor, under this sign. She said, quietly, that the clients stayed because of the food. She said that the reviews stayed because of the food. She said that the weddings booked back to back for 2 years outstayed because of the food, not because of the giant banners on the website or the influencer reels Chloe ran during the off-season. She said that the money in the bank, the money Marcus laughed about at conferences and used to buy leather chairs for his office that he never sat in, was the result of her getting up at 4 in the morning every single day of her adult life to taste broth until it was right. Marcus leaned down until his breath was warm on her cheek. He cut her off the way he had cut her off for years, with the sharp biting line he had first used in their 2nd year of marriage, when she had asked to be put on the company letterhead and he had laughed in her face. He straightened up just enough to gesture with one open palm at the embossed silver placard over the kitchen door, the placard she had paid for with 6 years of labor, the placard he had paid for with 6 years of billing under his own signature, Vance Catering. The silver caught the overhead light and threw it back in fragments across her apron. Look around you, Elena. Whose name is on the sign? He waited. He expected the silence he usually got. He got the silence. He did not notice that the silence had changed. Elena did not answer. She had learned, by then, that there was no good answer to that question. Any truth she offered would become In his telling, an act of ingratitude. He turned back to the prep table. He reached out one hand and picked up the battered leather recipe ledger from the corner where it had lived for as long as anyone in the kitchen could remember. The cover was stained with 7 years of grease, flour, and wine. The binding was broken halfway down the spine. The pages were swollen with handwritten notes in 4 different inks, some of them now nearly illegible because they had been written in the dark. At 3 in the morning, with the sweat of her left hand dripping onto the page, he held it up, like evidence at a trial. He demanded it. Elena hesitated, only for the length of one breath, the length of one small, private calculation about how much of her life was contained in that book. She had 247 proprietary recipes in those pages. She had, at that exact moment, no name on a lease, no signature on a bank account, no equity line of any kind she could defend in any room where signatures mattered. When her hand twitched forward, Marcus snatched the book off the counter and cradled it against his chest like a trophy. He said it was company property. He said she would understand eventually that everything good that had come out of her hands in this kitchen was, legally and spiritually, his. Elena went back to work. She finished the 300 rosettes in silence. She cleaned her station. She boxed up the orders for the front-of-house runners in, the silver carriers they used for transfers. She took out the trash, the way she always did at the end of a rush, because nobody else ever did. When she came back in through the service door, the heavy security lock over the handle was engaged. The red light was on. The plate steel door felt heavier than it had ever felt. She tugged once. She tugged twice. She saw Marcus's reflection appear in the small wire mesh glass set into the upper half of the door. He was inside, on his own side. He was pointing, with one finger, to the new private security guard standing beside him at the hostess desk. The guard did not look at her. The guard looked straight ahead. There was an intercom box to the left of the door. It had been installed the month before, ostensibly for contractors. Elena pressed the button. A burst of static answered. Then Marcus's voice clipped and fast, the way a lawyer reads off conditions. He told her the lease was held in his legal entity. He told her the operating accounts were in his name. He told her the apartment upstairs, the apartment they had shared for 6 years, the apartment where she had slept little and cooked for him even less than she cooked for strangers, was on the same single paying deed and subject to the same operating agreement. He told her she was terminated, effective immediately. He told her that any further attempt to enter the premises would result in a police call. He told her she would be mailed her personal effects in a single box. He told her there was nothing of hers left inside that was worth arguing about because the ledger was company property, and everything else was, too. Elena pressed the button twice more. There was no answer. She took her hand down from the wall. She looked through the wire mesh glass at the only career she had ever built. The kitchen lights were still blazing inside. Chloe was laughing with the security guard at the desk, her lacquered nails curved around a paper coffee cup. Marcus was still holding the ledger under one arm. The line cooks had gone back to work. The dishwasher had not stopped walking. Elena understood then that the entire machine had been designed to keep moving without her in it. Elena walked away. She had nothing. She had the clothes on her back, a damp chef's coat, a stained apron she had not thought to untie, a pair of broken-in clogs. She had the small canvas bag she carried too, and from work, the one with the folding knife and a hair tie and a half-finished novel she kept in case an order ever ran early. She had a phone with a cracked screen and a wallet with $63 in it. The garbage she had just taken out had been warmer than she was. She made it to the end of the block before the sky broke. The rain came in a hard wall of Water? The kind that did not settle in but arrived already furious. It hit the pavement and bounced back up past her ankles. It hit the canvas bag and soaked through. In seconds, she ducked under the awning of the bus stop on the corner of Vance Catering's block in full view of the silver sign over the kitchen door, and set the bag down between her feet. She pressed her back against the schedule, bored. She realized slowly that her entire 20s and her entire early 30s had been built on a foundation that had just dissolved. There had been no contract she had signed that could have saved her. There had been no equity line, no vesting schedule, no partner agreement. There had been her, alone in a kitchen, feeding a man who had decided this week that she was overhead. She delivered this realization out loud, in a quiet, heartbreaking murmur into the dark of the bus stop, because she had to hear it to believe it. She delivered it in pieces. She delivered it the way she delivered her broth, a little at a time, until the flavor of her own life was finally, fully visible to her. She was there for an hour before her legs gave out. She sat down on the wet bench under the awning. The rain kept falling. The silver sign across the street still said Vance Catering in clean, post-industrial letters. 2 blocks from where she sat, on a stretch of county road, nobody mentioned in the city's food guides, there was a diner called Julian's. It had not changed its menu in 22 years. It had not changed its upholstery in at least that long. The neon sign out front buzzed in a way that gave the parking lot a soft, headache rhythm that had, over the decades, become a kind of weather report for the regulars. Julian Vance, 65, had not spoken to his brother's only son in 9 years. He had been running Julian's alone since his wife died. He had 2 cooks, both in their 60s, who came in for the early shift and went home by 10. He had one waitress named Mabel, who had been with him longer than most of his marriages. He had a health report from the county that was 10 months past due and a roof he had been meaning to patch. He had given up on the idea of passing any of it down. Elena did not, strictly speaking, choose the back door of Julian's. She sat down against it because the brick was dry and the wind was coming from the east. She slid down the wall with her soaked bag in her lap. The neon above her head buzzed once, then twice, then held, and held, and held. The back door flew open. Julian stood there holding a mop. He looked down at her for a long, unblinking moment, the way a man who has spent 65 years on Earth looks at a thing he has not yet decided to trust. He did not say her name. He did not say he was sorry. He did not invite her to explain. He dropped a heavy white apron onto her lap, the kind that had been bleached 100 times and was now the color of old paper, and he delivered his first line of terse wisdom in a flat, weatherless voice. Rain don't pay rent. The kitchen floor needs scrubbing. Get up or move on. Elena got up. The diner was empty, except for Mabel, who was watching the late news behind the register with a cup of coffee she had grown to ignore. Julian pointed Elena toward the mop. He pointed her toward the walk-in. He pointed her toward the case where the day's leftover meatloaf was sitting, under a heat lamp that had been on since 9. He did not introduce her to anyone. He did not ask her name. He did not ask about the silver signs she had under her eyes when she turned around to face him from the dish pit. He handed her a clean towel and a paring knife and told her the staff meal started in 40 minutes, and that if she missed the staff meal, she missed the staff meal. She worked. She scrubbed. She ate the staff meal standing up, behind the line, the way staff eat everywhere when they have not yet earned a stool. The cooks gave her a sideways nod and went back to their cigarettes by the back fence. Mabel called her honey once, in passing, and never asked a question afterward. Julian did not return to the kitchen that night. By the 4th day, Julian had cleared half the menu and asked Elena to rebuild it from the bones of what was already on hand. He did not present a budget. He did not present a timeline. He cleared the menu the way a man pulls weeds before he plants a thing he has decided will live. Completely and without ceremony. Elena went into the cooler. She pulled down the oversalted broth. That had been the diner's signature for 22 years. She tasted it once. She tasted it twice. She tasted it a third time, the way her grandmother had taught her to taste things, with the spoon held slightly off the lip of the cup so the tongue could find the salt before the heat arrived. She added a single quarter teaspoon of sugar. She added a single dried bay leaf she had found at the back of the spice rack. She added nothing else. She set the pot back on the low burner for an hour and let the steam lift through the hood into the black sky. Julian tasted the broth at the end of his shift. He put his spoon down. He stared at her. He had not made a sound. He sat back down at the counter and delivered his next line, the one that would become a kind of weather pattern between them for the rest of her life, the way a tide table governs a fisherman. Foolish is loving someone. It is not the same as failing. Fix the salt. He did not say whose broth had been oversalted for 22 years. He did not say whose failure had been cooked in another kitchen on the other side of town. He said the salt. He said the salt because the salt was what was in front of him. Elena nodded. She had not realized, until that moment, that the salt was a metaphor. She had thought it was a literal instruction. She took the salt in her own fist and looked at it. She set it back on the shelf. She put her hands on the counter, the way she used to put them on the prep table in the Vance Catering kitchen when she was about to begin a long job. She understood, for the first time in her adult life, that she had been oversalting her own broth to compensate for something she could, not until that evening, name. She understood that the oversalting was not in the pot. The oversalting had been in the kitchen 2 miles away, with the silver sign on the door, and she had been carrying the compensation home in her own wrist for 6 years. By day 7, she had revised the meatloaf. She had rebuilt the gravy out of pan drippings and a single tablespoon of rendered chicken fat she had saved from the breakfast service. She had reinvented a breakfast hash out of vegetable trim that Julian had been throwing out every night for 20 years. A regular customer, a prominent local food critic who had been coming to Julian's for 16 years out of pure habit, walked in on his lunch break, sat at the counter, and ordered the meatloaf out of muscle memory. He did not look at the new kitchen face behind the glass. He ate 3 bites. He set down his fork. He flagged Mabel. He asked, in a low voice, almost apologetically, who was running the kitchen. Mabel tilted her head toward the line. The critic put his credit card down without waiting for his check. He tipped $100 on a $14 meal. He left before Elena could come out. He did not write a review that week. He wrote one the week after that, and the review was 3 lines long. But the second line was the only line anyone in the city would remember for the rest of the year. By the end of that first week, the diner was packed past its maximum capacity. People were standing at the counter in 2 neat, patient rows. People were pulling up milk crates from the back office and sitting on them against the wall. Word of mouth had crossed the city line. It had not been earned by a campaign. It had not been earned by an influencer. It had not been earned by a banner or a reel. It had been earned by a single bite of meatloaf at a counter stool by a man who had thought he was coming in for the same lunch he had been eating for 16 years, and who had, in 3 bites, recognized that he was eating, for the first time, the food the diner had always claimed to be. The line at the door was not a marketing line. It was a line of people who had been told, by someone they trusted, that the food had changed, and that the change had been for the better. The line also contained a woman who had once been Elena's sous chef at Vance Catering and who had not known, until that morning, that Elena was alive. Julian watched the line from the register. He did not smile. He nodded once. In Elena's direction, when she came out to clear a table that nobody had cleared yet because there were no tables left to clear. She nodded back. The nod was small. It was not small to her. On the 8th morning, a man in a charcoal suit walked into Julian's, leading a delegation of 3. It was the same corporate client Elena had been plating, for in the Vance catering kitchen on the night, Marcus had stolen the ledger. He was in town on a different event. He had heard rumors, on the trade wires, of a new cook on the old roadside, and he had come to verify. He sat at the counter. He ordered the lunch. He took one bite of Elena's revised croquette, the same croquette whose recipe was now nowhere in the ledger that was sitting on Marcus's desk, because Elena had never written it down. She had only carried it in her hands. The man set down his fork. He turned to Julian. He asked, very quietly, who was running the kitchen? Julian pointed to the line. The man took out his phone. He canceled his standing contract with Vance Catering from the counter stool while the steam rose from his plate. He signed, on the spot, a 6-figure retainer with Julian's diner, contingent only on the existence of the woman behind the glass. He left his card. He did not ask Elena's name. He did not need to. He had tasted her signature spice profile across 2 kitchens and 200 miles, and he knew with the quiet certainty of someone who eats for a living that there was only one cook on either coast who could put a bay leaf into a broth and get away with it, the way she had been getting away with it, secretly and without recognition, for 6 years. Elena came out from the kitchen when she heard the door close. Julian was standing at the register. He did not smile. He reached into the inside pocket of the diner's old tweed coat and pulled out a single folded piece of paper, the kind of paper that has heavy lines and a county seal at the bottom. He laid it on the counter between them. He did not explain it. He said it plainly. He was signing the diner over to her. He was retiring. He had been waiting, he said, for a cook who would know what the broth meant. He had been waiting, he said, since before he knew her name. He had been waiting, he said, for the kind of cook who fixes the salt instead of bottling it. He looked up at her, and for the first time since she had slept against his back door, his face loosened from its working expression. He delivered the line he had been holding, ever since she had walked in, the line that would, from this hour on, also live in his voice. Look out the window, kid. Whose name is on the sign? Elena turned her head toward the front glass. Outside on the road, the neon had always read Julian's. She had assumed it would always read Julian's, but the lettering on the panel had been changed in the small hours of the morning by a man she had assumed did not know how to be soft. The new lettering read in clean white fluorescent letters, Elena's kitchen. She put her hand on the cold glass. She did not say anything. She did not need to. The sign had said it for her. In the days that followed, Julian moved into a small apartment behind the dry cleaner 2 blocks over. He came in to mop floors before opening because he did not know how to retire. He refused a salary. He accepted a standing stool at the end of the counter, where he could eat 1 plate of whatever Elena had decided that day was right. He stayed long enough to see the lunch line grow. He did not stay long enough to become a fixture. Across the city, in the kitchen with the silver placard over the door, the story was on the other side of the same week. Marcus Vance stood in a kitchen that was, by any visible measure, exactly the kitchen he had stood in on the night he had stolen the ledger. The burners were the same. The ovens were the same. The signage was the same. The plate steel was the same. The room, however, was on fire in a way that no extinguisher could reach. The line cooks had been replaced in the last 6 weeks by 3 different sets of line cooks. The current set had been hired 2 days earlier and did not know where anything was. Chloe was standing on a milk crate in the middle of the kitchen floor, screaming into a phone about a missed delivery of pre-portioned garnishes. Marcus was pacing behind the pass, frantically flipping through the leather ledger, looking for the answer to a problem he could not name. He had the book open to the page on the corporate event croquette. He had reread it 7 times. The handwritten note at the bottom of the recipe read, "A pinch of memory." He stared at the words. He did not know what memory tasted like. Memory did not have a unit of measure. Memory was not an ingredient you could source from a vendor. He turned the page. He read the entry on the broth. The note there said, "Bay leaf, but only when the rain is the right rain." He stared at the words again. He did not know what the right rain was. He had never noticed, in 6 years, when the rain was the right rain. He had not been in the kitchen at the right time to notice. He had been at conferences. He had been on stages. He had been in front of cameras, holding the book up like a prop, signing copies of a book he had never written. He had, in 6 years, never once looked out the kitchen window at the rain. Chloe hung up her phone. She opened her tablet. She turned the screen toward him. The tablet showed a rolling feed of reviews, one after another, in an avalanche curve that descended from the upper right corner like an avalanche that had been waiting 6 years to begin. The reviews were not bad in the way early bad reviews are bad. They were bad in the way late bad reviews are bad. The kind that use the word fraud. The clients were not just complaining. The clients were suing. The corporate gala he had delivered the night he had fired Elena had been served in the days after, at hissing temperatures and missing garnishes. The wedding he had pledged to deliver the following weekend had been canceled by the bride's mother after a single photograph of a clumsy tart had surfaced. The bar mitzvah he had promised 2 weeks out had been quietly moved to a competitor who had poached one of his line cooks the week before. The brand was dying in public, in front of the same audience that had once made it sing. Marcus began to argue. Chloe matched his tone. They went back and forth in clipped, vicious call and response volleys, each one sharper than the last, while the kitchen timer beeped and beeped and beeped, and nobody turned it off, because nobody in the kitchen was a cook anymore. Chloe read the worst review aloud, the one that named Marcus by his full legal name, and ended with the suggestion that he return any licensing fees he had ever collected for the recipes, along with any award plaques and any conference honoraria, and that he do so promptly and quietly. She looked up. She set her tablet down. She delivered the line she had been holding since she had walked in 8 weeks earlier with her silk tops and her overhead spreadsheet and her high heels. She told him he had never been the genius. He had been the megaphone. She told him the food had been Elena's before she had arrived, and it had not been hers since. She told him he had, in fact, never once tasted his own broth during service hours because he had never been in the kitchen during service hours, and that his entire claim to the brand had been the silent labor of a woman he had decided, on a Tuesday, was overhead. She picked up 2 of her luxury travel bags from under the hostess stand, the ones she had been quietly packing during the argument, and she walked out the front door. The lock on the front door clicked behind her. The closed sign flipped of its own weight in the entry. Marcus was alone in a dark kitchen with a book he could not read. He paced for an hour. He turned the page on the ledger for the 800th time. He found his own name nowhere in it. He found Elena's handwriting on every margin. He found, in the back of the book, on the last page of the final section, a single line Elena had written for herself on the night of the audition 6 years earlier, the night he had told her she had the job. The line was small and unadorned. He had never read it before. For the kid who can't fail if she's not the one tasting. He closed the book. He put it under his arm. He walked out into a city that did not know his name anymore, in clothes that smelled, now only of his own sweat. 3 nights later, he stood at the front door of Elena's kitchen, in the last hour of service, in a suit he had not pressed in a week. The neon above him read, Elena's kitchen, in clean white letters. The door was unlocked because the dinner rush was over and the last of the bread was rising on the line for tomorrow. He pushed the door open. He stepped inside. He saw Elena, at the far counter, wiping down a stainless surface with the kind of focus she had always had. The kind of focus that looked, from the outside, like peace. The bread was rising. The hood was quiet. The plates had been put away. He spoke her name. She did not look up at first. She finished the section she was wiping. She set the rag down on the counter. She turned around. She saw him. She saw the suit. She saw the ledger still under his arm, the way he had carried it into her life 6 years earlier, the way he had carried it out of it. She did not smile. She did not frown. She looked at him as though she were looking at a piece of mail she had been expecting, a package she had been waiting for in order to refuse at the door. He begged her to come back. He offered her a 50-50 partnership on the old name. He told her the brand could be repaired. He told her the lawsuits were nearly settled. He told her that he had been under pressure and that his judgment had been compromised. He told her that they had built this together. He told her the past 6 years had been, in his eyes, a partnership, and that she had a moral claim on it, even if the paper said otherwise. He told her that she had been, and was, the only cook he had ever trusted. He told her that he had not handled the night well. He told her that he was handling the day badly. He did not, however, apologize. Elena stopped wiping the counter. She turned to face him fully. She delivered the line she had been holding since the night of the downpour, since the night she had pressed her back against the bus stop schedule and realized her entire life had been built on a foundation of sand, since the night Julian had handed her the apron and told her to fix the salt. Whose name is on the sign? Marcus? It's mine. And I didn't have to steal a ledger to get it. She told him to leave. She told him gently. She told him as though she were telling a delivery driver that he had come to the wrong address. She did not slam the door behind him because she did not need to. The door closed on its own weight, and Marcus was outside, on the sidewalk in the dark, holding a book he would never be able to read. He walked away. Elena finished, wiping the counter. She went back to the line. She checked the bread. She set the dishwasher. She locked the back door. She walked toward the rear, and as she passed the milk station, she heard a small, exhausted sound from the back door she had just locked. There was a young woman standing on the back step. She was crying. She had the same canvas bag Elena had had on the night of the bus stop, the one with a hair tie and a folding knife and a half-finished novel. She had been carrying to and from work for years. She was, perhaps 23. She had been fired, by her own words, in a quiet voice, from a kitchen 2 blocks over, by a man who had told her she was nothing without his sign. She had walked to Elena's kitchen because her phone's last search had been "Where can a line cook eat tonight?" Elena looked at her. She saw, in the young woman's hands, the same set of knuckles she had once had. She saw the same posture, the same slight curve in the lower back that came from leaning over a prep table for 16 hours a day. She saw, under the young woman's eyes, the same silver shadow that had been under Elena's on the night of the downpour. Elena opened the back door wide. She handed the young woman a clean white apron, the kind that had been bleached 100 times, the kind Julian had handed Elena on the night of the rain. She did not console her. She did not ask her in for a glass of water. She delivered the line she had been holding since the night Marcus had screamed at her across The prep table. The line that would, from this hour on, belong to the line of cooks that ran through Julian's apron and through her own hands and through now the hands of the young woman on the back step. You are everything without his name. Fix the salt. The young woman took the apron. She stepped inside. Elena closed the door behind her.